we're tackling more episodes centering around Lily and Carlitos, only this time, Linso and Carlos are the main characters of both of these episodes. Breaking Dad and The Oddfather. The Oddfather is where Carlos and Carlitos have the final episode before the series came to an end, and I wouldn't say that this episode is a great send-off to these characters in the same way as Carlota, but it's still better than Frita's last episode, since I discussed that in my top 5 worst Casagrandes episodes. If there's one thing that people have in mind when it comes to these two episodes, it has the same structure as Dumped from SpongeBob SquarePants. Usually, I remember that episode and people say that it's either the best episode or the worst episode. When Jim Reviews ranked this episode as the worst episode of the pre-movie era, I somewhat agree with him, but considering that the Loud House and the Casagrandes took inspiration from this episode and make it their own in order to make characters like Linso and Carlos be like SpongeBob, while Mr. Grouse and Vito is being betrayed as Patrick, it really shows that they tried to improve a lot more compared to how the characters were portrayed in Dumped. Granted, for how Lily and Carlitos are portrayed in these episodes in the same way as Gary did in Dumped, I would say that their motivations and their emotions really make sense in these two episodes, considering that Gary in Dumped barely does anything other than being attached to Patrick, all because he has a cookie in his pocket. In Breaking Dad, Linso wants to go to a concert so badly, so he hired Mr. Grouse to take care of Lily in the meantime. In The Oddfather, Carlos needs to find a godfather for Carlito, so he picks Vito. In all honesty, both plots have similar structures of the main character, mainly the fathers, have to do something in order to have the baby being taken care of. Well, granted, Breaking Dad only has that element, while this episode is just mainly just trying to find a godfather for christening, but at the same time, I really felt like that this episode, The Oddfather, just goes to show that they really tried to make a really good final episode centering around Carlos and Carlitos. And considering that this is also the final time we're ever going to see Vito in a main character role, granted, he did contribute something in the following episode where Carlota is playing basketball and he really wanted a rematch against her, but at the same time, it's really weird to think that Vito ended up getting some kind of closure in some other capacity before the show came to an end, which isn't saying something knowing full well that Frita had the short end of the stick. But if you want to know more about that, go check my top 5 worst Casagrandes video so you can understand. So getting back to Breaking Dad, if there's one thing I can relate to, is the fact that Linso tries way too hard. I mean, considering that this is a better version than Dumped, knowing full well that SpongeBob didn't do anything to deserve his punishment, Linso somewhat deserves it for Lily giving Mr. Grouse the responsibility to take care of Lily. But the thing is, knowing full well that Linso is dealing with 11 siblings and he just wants to go to a concert to enjoy himself, you cannot deny that you somewhat understand that if he doesn't do it, then he's just going to miss the concert completely because there was no other alternative whatsoever. Yes, it's not right for him to do a stunt like this, knowing full well of how he would get the consequences, but at the same time, since that Lily is being playful around Mr. Grouse, who we've witnessed that has a family he couldn't get to during the Christmas season, just goes to show that if the focus was mainly of how Mr. Grouse is a better father to Lily, it will probably be something interesting, but at the same time, considering that he's mostly a tool for Linso to deal with when it comes to being playful around Lily and being a better father to Lily, I'm going to assume that it's going to be difficult for people to find sympathy towards Mr. Grouse because he lives far away from his family, and the fact that he's one of the neighbors of the Lau family just goes to show that it will probably be difficult to understand his side of things, knowing forward that he only cares about Lin So's food and nothing more. In all honesty, that's literally the worst thing that we've seen from Mr. Grouse in this episode, is that he only thinks about food. And if you want to make the comparison of how Patrick was betrayed and dumped, I'm just going to say that they just didn't know what to do with Patrick in that episode, considering that the major focus is SpongeBob being heartbroken because Gary is no longer with him. But whereas Gary did it a lot more better. Carlos's motivation, since that he along with his family are Christians, I'm going to assume that his motivation in order to have someone be a godfather for Carlitos is going to be somewhat of an interesting text, because if we did have 4th season, there's probably a chance that we're probably going to have an episode involving Vito and Carlitos together. I mean, granted, I don't think people will probably prefer that for an episode, but considering that Carlos is trying everything to find a godfather for Carlitos, it really shows. And considering he can't be able to use any of his family members to be the godfather for Carlitos, yeah, it really shows that Carlo was being badly influenced by Sergio. If I'm gonna be honest, if Lola was badly influenced by someone else, I can totally understand her character a lot more, but considering that Carla is being badly influenced, it somewhat shows onto why that this episode kind of explains his Carla being similar to Lola, but at the same time has an actual reason because he was badly influenced. But getting back on track, Carlos's motivations when it comes to trying to stay in touch with Frita, knowing full well that he wants to make this day important for not only the entire family, but for her, and the fact that he had to turn to Vito in order to find the perfect godfather for Carlitos, I'm gonna be honest. Carlos tried to find 3 other people in order to be their godfather for Carlitos, but considering it didn't work out, the only option that he had is going straight to Vito. And considering that Vito is being in a serious role compared to Mr. Grouse, he didn't mean to intentionally make things worse for Carlos. In all honesty, the fact that he is willing to be this respectful for Carlitos, knowing full well that he isn't babysitting unlike Mr. Grouse, made me convinced that the people behind the show are really trying to make every single character when it comes to supporting characters really likable, which is I honestly think that people do not understand when it comes to why people really enjoyed this show. Granted, I can understand that you cannot get into all the characters if you're only a Loud House fan, but at the same time, ever since I watched nearly all the episodes from this show, it kind of shows onto why nearly every single character is somewhat likable in their own way. Granted, I understand that not every single character are redeemable because there are a few episodes where they go a little too far on their selfishness or their IQs at times, but still. I'm just gonna be perfectly honest with you that during the 3 years of this show airing on Nickelodeon is pretty much the most accomplishment that Nickelodeon has when it comes to having a spin-off from a major show. But to give Breaking Dad credit, considering that Lin So is willing to give Lily the attention that he needs for her, goes to show that he is so desperate on to make everything right. So like, the home of the fave just goes to show that he's just trying to focus on every single sibling. And when it comes to this episode, where he's just trying to get the admiration from Lily, all the while that he realizes that Mr. Grouse could be the better father than him, it's really difficult to go against him. Like, it's his fault that he got himself in this situation, but at the same time, he is trying way too hard to be a father to his 11th sibling. Like, As much as I cannot condone at the fact that Lin, So, and Rita are terrible people, but at the same time, they're still terrible parents. Not Mr. Tono and Mrs. Tono bad parenting, but at the same time, considering that they're dealing with 11 siblings, it kind of shows that you can actually feel the sympathy in their motivations, especially home of the fave, and the fact that Rita is willing to break laws in order to do community service just to get out of the house. But at the same time, in some instances, it just really feels like that these two characters are basically ongoing cousins rather than mother and father, mainly when it comes to the antics that the Loud siblings get themselves into. Usually I would go into further detail in this topic, but I'm gonna be saving that once I talk about the other bad episodes involving the Loud House, since I'm saving that for a future Cartoon Crisis 3 video. The endings of both episodes are somewhat mixed, because as much as I enjoy the ending of Breaking Dad, where it's revealed that Lily only cares about the green sweater that Mr. Grouse had been wearing the entire time, the ending of The Oddfather is better, mainly the fact that Vito actually cares about Carlitos, while Mr. Grouse only cares about Linso's food. I understand that's supposed to be a joke in Breaking Dad, but if you look in this episode much more closely, you can totally understand that they were intentionally making this way more serious when it comes to Vito's character. Some people say that Carlos in this episode isn't really good because he was being selfish, but at the same time, he realized his mistakes towards the end. Because I'm gonna be perfectly honest with you, after seeing all the characters when it comes to parents, it's really difficult to be a good parent in this show. And I'm being serious. I understand that there are a few exceptions when it comes to the parents in this show, but whenever I look at the Loud family and the Casagrandes, it just goes to show that it's just difficult to take them seriously as parents, knowing full well that they always fail at their jobs. Well, not all the time, but when I say always, it's literally full of proof that whenever you look at these episodes, mainly this, it's really difficult to take them seriously as parents when you feel sympathy towards them as people. You can't sympathize them as parents, but when it comes to normal people, it's literally the only option. And considering that shows like SpongeBob and Jimmy Neutron does parenting a lot more better, mainly I'm referring to SpongeBob's parents and Jimmy's parents, it's honestly really questionable to think that parenting in this show has becoming really, really stale. Not stale as in bad, but mainly of how the characters were taken seriously since the series began. Mainly the first season, the first appearance of the Casagrandes. Mainly, I'm addressing that the parents in this show, mainly the Laos and the Casagrandes, don't even feel like actual parents when it's difficult to sympathize with them. Like, the closest you can feel sympathy towards is probably Rosa, because she is trying so hard to be a parent. If you ask me, the more I watch these two shows, the more I suck into the logic to the point that it's broken, but at the same time, you can only feel sympathy towards the characters for different reasons, not the reasons that they want you to feel. With that being said, which episode is superior? Well, I can't believe I'm actually saying this, but both episodes are equal. Like, I know I say that the ending of The Oddfather is superior, but at the same time, the majority of the episode just feels somewhat of a slightly watered down version of Breaking Dad. And in my opinion, I did prefer Breaking Dad much more better, but at the same time, the ending is supposed to be comedic, and as much as I understand, I actually know why people enjoy the ending when it comes to humorous stakes, and the fact that this episode is superior over SpongeBob's Dumped. It's not that difficult to make an episode superior over that. Because whenever I look at these two episodes, the only thing I can think of is Linso and Carlos are somewhat the same when it comes to them trying to be good parents. And don't get me wrong, there are a few incidents where they try to be good parents from time to time, but at the same time, like I stated before, the parenting in both of these shows are sometimes non-existent. And I'm not saying that because I do not like Linso and Carlos, because they're okay. It's just that when you look into the show a lot more when it comes to the motivations and how they're portrayed, it really feels like you only see them as regular people rather than parents. Kid shows or not, you always look deeply in these shows when you rewatch them. Because when I watched this episode for the first time, same goes to The Oddfather, I was watching it blindly, like I usually do, and the only reason I pay attention to it whenever I make a review of it is mainly if I'm really invested with the plot. So, for me personally, if you really think that I was rooting the other episode to win, keep in mind, my perspective on the episodes that I compared over the last several Sundays is mainly of how they're executed, and in fact, I'm rewatching them. I never show any favoritism, it's just my perspective of what I see involving two episodes. So with that being said, both episodes get a 7.5 out of 10, while each show gets an additional point for a draw. Granted, that's not how scores work, but at the same time, that's how I view it whenever I do something like this.